So in the last video, I indicated we might spend a little time back at the piano talking about a few theory concepts. Again, I'm not an expert on this, may not use all the right terminology, but the point is to get a few of these fundamental concepts, into your brain so that you can apply that to playing a banjo. And I think I know enough about that. So, we have an idea of using chords. But what is a chord, and why is it the way it is? Discussing that a little bit more at length will be helpful to understand why the chords are what they are throughout the key as well. So the first concept, I think, a very fundamental concept in music theory is intervals. It's really just describing the relationship between two notes, the distance in terms of pitch frequency that two notes have. Music theory is sort of governed around these principles. So one we're all familiar with, whether we realize it or not, is the octave. That's an interval, and it's really just describing a tone, and an octave from that is double in pitch. It arrives at the same tone, but it's higher in pitch. So that's, kind of the widest interval we typically deal with, at least at a basic level. There's a few others that are kind of important. I mean, all of them are in some form or fashion, but for studying the basic chord concepts, understanding what a perfect fifth is and what a third is pretty important. So let's move over to the piano and discuss that a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about these intervals. The last time we were at the piano, I pointed out that C, which is what we're kind of basing our visualization on because it's the one that most naturally shows this off. C is the white key before the group of two black keys. And it doesn't matter where on the piano it is. This is a C, this is a C, this is a C. These are an octave apart. That's the first interval we generally come to understand is that octave. They're the same note. An interval is a measurement of distance, basically, between these notes, and it's actually describing the change in pitch from one note to another. The notes that are in a scale all have relationships to one another, right? So your 1 to the 1 is a octave. Your 1 to your 2 is a second. Your 1 to the 3 is a third. Your 1 to the 4 is a fourth. Seeing a pattern? Your 1 to the 5 is a fifth. Your 1 to the 6 is a sixth. Your 1 to the 7 is a seventh. And then your 1 to the 1 is an octave. That seems pretty straightforward when you say it like that, but that's not all an interval is, right? It's not just from the 1 to the 2 or the 1 to the 4. It describes any of these relationships between one another. So from the 1 to the 5 is a perfect fifth. I'll explain that in a minute. Here's your 1, right? But if I play from the 5 to the 2, that's a fifth as well. So the fifth is kind of the next interval that we're exposed to. The reference song that I always use for this is Twinkle Twinkle. That opening change in pitch is a perfect fifth. And we all know that song, right? So you know a perfect fifth. Twinkle, twinkle. That's a perfect fifth. The octave and the perfect fifth are ones to kind of get your head around right here at the start. However, your basic chords are typically made up of more than two notes. There's some variants out there, but typically your basic chord is called a triad because it's made of 3 different notes. They're not selected randomly or anything like that. Some notes harmonize better than others with each other. These different relationships add tension or add consonants. They sound real nice and stable together, like the fifth sounds very stable. The octave sounds very stable. They're the same tone, right? And the perfect fifth is almost like that as well. It can actually confuse your tuners as well. If you have your tuner in chromatic tuning, you'll notice it jumping between notes sometimes, and it's typically the note you're targeting and the fifth that's associated with it. So how are the tones in a chord selected? And we're not really selecting them, we're actually building them from these intervals. This triad that I'm describing of 3 notes, what notes are the 3? Why is it structured this way? It's built by stacking thirds. That next interval to understand, the third, okay? 1, 3, that's a third, right? From your 3 to the 5, that's also a third. So by stacking these 2 thirds together, we get a chord. And they can actually keep stacking, and you start getting into those real complex chords, the ones with real weird names on sheet music and stuff. But we're sticking to the basics here. The basic chord construction is by stacking a third on top of another third, okay? Now, when I go through the chords of the major key, 1, 3, 5 is your 1 chord, 2, 4, 6 is your 2 chord, 3, 5, 7 is your 3 chord. And notice that I'm still just doing that same thing. I'm stacking thirds, right? 4, 6, 1, 5, 7, 2, 6, 1, 3, 7, 2, 4, and then you're back to your root chord, the 1, but it's an octave higher. 1, 3, 5. When we look at this, the chords that are in the major key, we also notice that some of them are major and some of them are minor. And they're always, the same chords are major and the same chords are minor within the key. Your 1 is major, your 2 is minor, your 3 is minor, your 4 is major, your 5 is major, your 6 is minor, your 7 chord is something different called a diminished chord, and then you're back to your 1. There's only 7 chords in the key, and it's major. At this point, it's time to understand why some of these chords are major and why some of them are minor. So let's dig into this a little bit. From your 1 to your 3 is a third. We've already established that. From your 3 to your 5 is a third as well. They're both third intervals. But there's 2 kinds of thirds. There's a minor third and a major third, okay? So when we look at this 1 to 3 in a major chord, let's count how many half steps there are. I think the technical term would be semitones. So from your 1, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones, okay? That's what makes a major third. In other words, that's 4 frets on the banjo, okay? So from your 3 to your 5, let's look at this third. It's, how many semitones is that? It's 1, 2, 3. So there's less semitones in that third. From your 1 to 3, it's 4 semitones. From your 3 to your 5, it's 3 semitones. Both of those are third intervals, but one of them is major and one of them is minor. So when I play this C major chord, I can actually manipulate this into a C minor chord by flattening this third. See how much sadder that sounds? Definitely that minor tonality. Okay, and when I did that, look, I've got 1, 2, 3 to the 3 to the third, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the major chord, those 2 thirds are arranged as a major third, then a minor third. If I look at the 2 chord, from the 1 to the 3 in your 2 chord, it's 1, 2, 3, right? And from the 3 to the 5 in your 2 chord, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the difference between a major chord and a minor chord, is that the major chord leads with a major interval, major third, and then the second half of the chord is a minor third. On your minor chord, it leads with the minor third, and the second half of the chord is a major third. And that's actually what's happening as we maneuver through this whole, half, whole, half interval steps that make up the major scale. The chords have to be major for your first chord, minor for your second chord, because it's minor third and then a major third, minor chord for your third chord, because it's minor and then major. Your 4 chord is major because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a major third, and your second from the 3 to the 5 in it is a minor third. 1, 2, 3. 5 chord is major as well. 6 chord is minor. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And then you're on your 7 chord, which is diminished. Oh, what's diminished? We won't get into this too much, but look, it's 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. It's a different class of chord. It's called diminished. And then you're back to your root. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So it's major thirds and minor thirds. Major third, minor third. And you can kind of hear another reference tune I use for hearing a major third. Kumbaya, kumbaya. That interval is a major third. It's not kumbaya. It sounds kind of sad, haunting, kind of a weird variation on kumbaya, kind of a sad kumbaya, but it's kumbaya. Okay? So that's kind of the quick and dirty intro to these intervals. Major thirds, perfect fifths, and it's a perfect fifth because there isn't a major or minor fifth. It's a perfect fifth. It's only one. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail at some later point, but I don't want to get too in the weeds here. And then your octave. Somewhere, twinkle, twinkle, kumbaya, kumbaya. All right, that's probably enough piano for today. Actually, I do have one other thing. So on the banjo, we don't have the benefit of these keys kind of, it's, you know, we're just moving through the same, right? I mean, but on the banjo, we can't do that. We've got strings and frets and no black keys and white keys to work with. So you have to understand how to maneuver, how to manipulate the chord shapes that I've been showing you. So if our first chord shape is, and we want to come over here and do the 2 chord, let's say that this is our 2 chord, well, what we're going to have to do is identify the 3, and this is why I'm telling you the 5, 1, 3, 5, so you can identify the root and the third that's in it. You take that third and you flat it down a half step and that'll make your minor third, and then you've got a minor chord. Okay, so let's take that back over to the banjo and see what that looks like. All right, back with the banjo in my hand. Over on the piano, we discussed the concept that the structure of a basic chord is created by stacking thirds, that being the interval, the third. And they typically tend to alternate major and minor thirds is how that's stacked. For instance, your open G chord that's open here, it's your G, it's a major third to that 3 tone, and then between the 3 and the 5 it's a minor third, and that's how you know it's a major chord. That's what makes a major chord. When we moved to the 2 chord, we saw that it was a minor chord, and it still has that that perfect fifth spread between the 2 outside notes, but the only difference is that the order in which those 2 thirds are stacked. It's in a minor chord, it's a minor third and then a major third, and that's what creates that that minor chord sound. We also showed how you can turn a major chord into a minor chord by flattening the third a half step. So what does all that mean in the context of the chords that we're learning how to navigate here? Well, when you're playing this bar chord shape, right, you've got a 1, a 3, and a 5 that's making up your major chord, and this bar chord shape is a major chord. No matter where you place it on the neck, it's a major chord based off that 3rd string. Well, since you know the tone order, 5, 1, 3, 5, you know which one of those tones you have to flatten a half step to make it a minor chord. So if I take this A major chord, and on the 2nd string we know the 3 tone and the A chord is on the 2nd string. If we flatten it a half step, that makes it a minor chord. So I can do this, you know, this triangle shape essentially by flattening that 3rd. So hear the difference? It's the minor chord. And this relationship between major and minor thirds is what's dictating whether these chords throughout the key in the G major scale are, or any major scale, are major or minor. And it's pretty much a set pattern, right? The 1 chord is major, the 2 chord is minor, the 3 chord is minor, the 4 chord is major, the 5 chord is major, the 6 chord is minor, and the 7 chord is a diminished chord. And that's a topic for another day. So using your bar chord shape, you can find all the chords associated with the key. Then A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, and then F diminished. And then back to your root chord, your 1 chord, but up an octave higher, right? That's all the chords that are in the key. You can do the same thing with the shape, 2nd shape that we talked about, which is that positioned at the 5th fret, and the tone order on it is 1, 3, 5, 1. Since we know that the 3 tone is on the 3rd string, we can flatten that. That's a G minor. Of course, G minor is not in this key, right? It's a G major chord. But since this shape, the root tone is always on the 4th string or the 1st string, any tone you play on this 4th or 5th string, you can find the major chord with this shape. That's an A major, right? Because I went up a whole step from G. Of course, A major isn't in the key, right? We determined that it's a minor chord. So you just flatten that 3rd, right? So you can do G, A minor, B minor, C, D, E minor, and you'll notice that I'm up here at the 12th fret at this point, and I've got the 14th fret, the 12th fret, the 12th fret, and the 14th fret fretted, right, to make that E minor chord, which is exactly the same as up here near the nut. Just imagine me fretting these two, the second and third strings. That's your E minor chord. So it just repeats. So one thing you're going to find that by knowing all the chords and the shapes all the way up the neck is that all these chords interlock with one another, right? You've only got 7 tones available. Each chord is using 3 tones of the scale, and it's a pretty set pattern. So some chords share tones, right? Notice that open G chord is using that D, G, B, D. The E minor chord is E, G, B, D, right? Because your 1 chord is the 1, 3, 5, and your 6 chord, which is the E minor, is 6, 1, 3, right? So there's some overlap and they interlock. So by knowing the 3 different shapes, you can find how they're actually connected to one another in the position that you're at on the fingerboard. So that's just kind of an example of how this is helpful, and it's also helpful in navigating the scale around these chord shapes. So in the next video, I'll be doing the 3rd chord shape, which just rearranges the tone order again and places the root tone of the chord on the 2nd string, and it's going to end up being 3, 5, 1, 3 is the tone order. And then once you have all 3 shapes down and you know what tone is the root for each chord, for each shape, bar chords, it's on the 3rd string. This chord, the shape 2, it's on the 4th and the 1st string, and then on the 3rd shape, it's on the 2nd string. So whatever note you're playing on the fretboard, you can find the major chord associated with it based on which string it happens to be on. So that's powerful in and of itself, but it unlocks a lot more that we'll get into later. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.